Hey YouTube, I've got another unboxing video. Today we're going to be looking at the MSI MEG X870E Godlike. So this is the biggest and probably the most expensive AM5 motherboard that has launched recently for the new Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. So kind of a perfect choice for someone looking to build a mini high-end desktop, whether you're going to be using a 9950X, for example, or maybe the upcoming 9950X 3D, or maybe just the 9800X 3D. So let's just kind of do an overview. You can see on the back, 10 gig plus 5 gig LAN, Wi-Fi 7, that's the fast Wi-Fi 7, so it's at 320 megahertz, USB 4, of course, so there's dual 40 gig, smart button, all this stuff on the back. So it's fully loaded. We're going to look at it when we unbox it. Dynamic Dashboard 3, that's their software, but the main thing here that makes this Godlike more unique compared to a lot of the other motherboards is it includes this removable, it's magnetically attached display that will do stuff like show the postcode debug and temperature information and stuff like that. And then also it includes the Easy Control Hub, which is like a fan control hub, so that's in the box as well, and a Gen 5, two M.2 Gen 5 expander PCIe card. So we'll look at that as well. So lots of stuff in here, but it is a very steep asking price. These are available on Newegg. Check the link in the description below. It comes in all this plastic. And the reason for that is because it actually has a sliding thing here. It slides out. So very fancy packaging from MSI. And here is the main box inside. And it kind of opens up like this. Oh wow, it pushes it, extends it. In the box, Godlike Beyond the Norm, meet the Godlike. And there it is in all its glory. A super high-end motherboard, which is kind of interesting because it has like this gamer aesthetic. However, this is definitely more for like a mini workstation type computer. So it's like for somebody who doesn't want to pay for a Threadripper system, but they do want like all the options in terms of USB and PCIe connectivity and Gen 5 storage and all that stuff. So let's kind of look at what's in the box. So inside the box, underneath the motherboard, there's a bunch of accessories here, including this fan hub. Not only is it a fan hub, it also has RGB, ARGB. There's a bridge, there's a cable for that links it to the motherboard, and so that's in there. The Wi-Fi 7 antenna is in here. And it's in two pieces. It's magnetic as well. So that's in there. So there's a rather large accessory box. And this is going to have all of the necessary cables. So things like adapters, looks like some SATA cables and things like that. So what you would expect to find in here is basically the Easy Bridge cable and a bunch of like other cables. So I'm just going to leave that in there and set that to the side for now. Alright, and then there's also, this is what I was talking about earlier, so the M.2 Expander X Glider Gen 5. So at the back here, there are these removable M.2. So they come out like this. And they only go in one way because the pins are like that. But you'd put a Gen 5 SSD in there. You don't have to put a Gen 5 SSD, but if you put a Gen 5 in there, it will support up to Gen 5 speeds. So that is something to keep in mind. So there's two of them in there. So that means that this uses 8 lanes of up to Gen 5 bandwidth. It has a fan. So there's a switch if you want the fan to run or not. So if you're putting Gen 4 SSDs in here, you probably don't need to run the fan at all. Gen 4 and Gen 3, they don't need, this is like enough passive cooling for Gen 4. But if you're doing Gen 5, maybe it needs the fan. I'll probably do some testing and find out on that. But I think that's everything. Okay, so there's actually some stuff underneath here. So lastly, hidden away at the bottom, there is shout out MSI and like a quick install guide and European Union regulatory notices. So, okay, and then underneath, there's actually a couple more things. There's an extra thermal pad. Well, there's a couple of thermal pads. There are some screws, some long screws, a USB drive with the drivers for the motherboard, like chipset drivers, Wi-Fi drivers, etc. There are some stickers from MSI, Lucky the Dragon, some SATA stuff, SATA cable labels, and then this this connector thing here. So this stuff was hidden away underneath the foam that had like the expander card and the accessories. So just if you're curious, that's at the very bottom of the box. All right, so that's everything in the box. Go ahead and put that away. It's a very fancy box. Okay, for the motherboard itself, it is extremely large. It is definitely extended ATX. In fact, it's a little bit longer than the ASRock Tai Chi and the Aorus Master that I have shown on the channel previously. So it's definitely eATX. You can see the third screw hole is actually underneath this thing. Okay, so the Easy Bridge is unique in that it is held on by adhesive magnets. So it is actually, these are pretty strong magnets. There are no screws holding this down. There is a connector here, a proprietary connector that will connect it. So that will effectively link all of these things like the front panel header, the JFP2 speaker for the motherboard, the bridge for the fan controller, tuning controller, I'm not sure what tuning controller is, and some other stuff here. And some, looks like there's power cables and things. So the CMOS battery is actually, it's kind of like a laptop battery. That's interesting. You don't see motherboard batteries look like this typically with the little wire like that. But underneath, you can see the GPU disconnect, just like on the Carbon and the Tomahawk. So this actually is compatible with that because there's a switch there that extends it. So let's put this back on. So that just goes on like that. You do not want to lift the motherboard by this because it's held on only by magnets. It even tells you that right here. But this is a display panel that will show things like the postcode debug. So very nice. Just to look at the side here, just to run through this, there are ARGB pins here, CPU fan header, pump system 1, the 24-pin ATX plug, a power delivery plug for the fast charging. This provides 60-watt charging to the 20 gigabit USB-C over here. There's another then there's another 10 gig USB-C here for the front panel. Pump system header as well. Dual USB 3.0. Another PCIe power plug for the PCIe slots for extra power if you're going to run multi-graphics cards, for example. 2 SATA ports here. And then you get the, what looks like front panel and HD audio, I believe, at the very bottom there. Then along the bottom here, it's actually hidden away by this little magnetic cover here that comes off. It's actually taped here, so I'll have to peel that off. But that right there hides the switches for overclocking, like slow mode, for example, and 2 more SATA ports. So there are 4 SATA ports on this motherboard. And there's looks like a reset. And all of this should be toolless. So there's a press tab on the left here. You press that down, and then this comes off like this. So underneath, there is the 5th M.2 slot. This motherboard has 5 M.2s. All of them have thermal padding on the bottom and the top. So I'll go ahead and reattach this like that. So that's there. And then if we take this other middle section off here, this reveals 3 more M.2s. And I like that what MSI has done here. It is completely toolless, just like with Gigabyte. MSI's design is fully toolless now. So you don't need a screwdriver to install M.2 drives, which is really, really nice. And then there's another M.2 heatsink here that has its own RGB for the Gen 5 heatsink. So, and there you go. So it's got a lot of heatsinks. So you can see one Gen 5, another Gen 5, and then 3 Gen 4 SSDs for a total of 5 M.2s. All of these SSDs can be driven or populated, and the graphics card will maintain 16 lanes. There is no GPU lane sharing on this motherboard between the M.2 drives and the graphics card. Now, the second slot here is an X8 Gen 5 slot, so this one will use lanes from the top slot. So if you populate both of these slots, then the top will be at X8 and the bottom will be at X8. The reason for that is because they included this Gen 5 card. The idea behind that is to plug the Gen 5 card in here, so you can do 4 lanes to one SSD in here, and then 4 lanes to the second SSD, so that's why it's X8. But to do that, it takes lanes from the graphics card. So technically there is graphics card lane sharing, but only if you use this or if you're using the second PCIe slot. Otherwise, you can do 5 M.2s with no lane sharing. Then if you add 2 more, you can do a total of 7 M.2 drives and get an insane amount of storage with this flagship motherboard. This is a 10-layer PCB, which means it probably has the best potential for overclocking RAM because electro noise isolation will be superior on a thicker layer PCB. This is more closer to a server grade PCB. So hence why it is more expensive than your average motherboard, as well as providing a lot of fancy features here, as well as 5 M.2s with no lane sharing, for example. So this is the heatsink for the dual chipset. Here is the AM5 socket. It comes with the mounts there. One thing that MSI has done differently, the EPS cables are now plugging in above the RAM, whereas on most motherboards they're over here. So that is something that is different. Like I said, it is a very wide motherboard. You can see the third screw is here, and then there's about a good 1.5 inches of extra extension here, well beyond the ATX specs. This is definitely eATX, so you're going to want to make sure you have a relatively large, either a full tower case or a modern case that can fit an eATX board. Because the other thing too is not only is it very long, but all these cables will have to plug in at a right angle, which will further extend the amount of space required in the front end of the case. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking of getting this board. The case selection is going to be very specific here. All right, and then finally on the back, this is fully loaded. We have optical audio for the Toslink cables. We have the typical mic and headphone jack, Wi-Fi 7 plugs here, dual LAN, one is 10 gig, and then you also get 5 gig, so that is very, very nice. This is like workstation territory here. 8 Type A, 10 gigabit USB Type A. Every USB port on this board on the back are 10 gig or better. We have 5 10 gig USB Type C. That is very good for future proofing. And then finally, up here at the top, 2 40 gigabit USB 4. These 2 ports at the top are fully compatible with Thunderbolt 4 and Thunderbolt 3 peripherals. So then finally, the flash BIOS, clear CMOS button, and the smart button, which is a programmable button. You can make it do different things. Very heavy motherboard. This is probably the heaviest motherboard I have ever carried in my hand. And finally, this motherboard includes, as expected, a full backplate on the back. So this is the true king of X870E. This is an S-tier flagship motherboard in terms of what it's offering. You don't have to worry about lane sharing. I can fill all 5 of these drives. I'm still going to be running 16. And at the very bottom here, we also have an X4, which is an open slot. So you can technically plug in a second or third graphics card, but this is perfect for a 4K capture card. So that's just what I will be using it with. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for the unboxing video of the X870 MSI Godlike. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below on what you think of these flagship motherboards for a new AMD build. This is most likely going to be built with the 9950X, and possibly next year this will be a good choice for the 9950X3D when that thing shows up. Otherwise, that's going to be it for me on this video. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks.